Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Sunday night comfy historical gaming stream. I'm Renegade Historian, and tonight I was feeling a bit luckier, so I am going to throw myself at the mercy of RN Jesus and try my hand at another France run. Those of you who watched the first stream know that my first France run went horribly, so let's hope for better luck tonight. So, France, for a while in this game, you had a vassal swarm. They took that away several patches ago, but we just got it back. So vassal swarm it is. It makes it almost impossible for England to win the Hundred Years' War. There used to be some cheesy ways you could do that in older patches, but now it's pretty much impossible for England to actually get away with it. So we're starting out, we're going to give the estates some privileges to get them on our side. We don't want to give them monopoly on wine because that's a bit too valuable for us. It makes us a fair amount of money. Um, what do I want to go with here? I don't want to give them land. Uh, hmm. Let's go with oversight by clergy. In France, you automatically have this French strong duchies privilege, which, while you have vassals, is a nice advantage. But we're going to give them monopolies on livestock, mining, and we'll let them stay at that. And then the bourgeoisie, which is France's equivalent to the burghers, we're going to give them monopoly on textiles, monopoly on paper, and private trade fleets and free enterprise, because we won't need any absolutism until much later in the game. All right, I think we're in a pretty happy place. Set our rivals. France is almost always going to be England, Burgundy, and Austria. Although once in a blue moon, Burgundy will be your friend. It's rare, but it does happen. So, with our extra money, we're going to finish building to our force limit. Have one full stack of 20 there. And there we go. There we go. Turn that one off. I'm going to be using the updated missions tonight. I think they're a bit more fun. And in France, you do have two generals. We're going to set them to train until we have, well, depending on what this event does, we'll turn them off training pretty soon. Right, so I think we are set to start. Yep, mission expanded. And we will take curtail noble power. Very nice. Right, so historically speaking, the Hundred Years' War was a very long conflict between France and England over who was the rightful king of France. And it all has to do with the weirdness of medieval succession laws. So, in England, female inheritance was something that happened. It was something you could do. It was rare, but it did happen. That was just how their succession laws worked. But in France, they were using Salic law, which heavily favored males and women could not inherit at all. So, by English law, the King of England had a claim on the throne of France, but by French law, he didn't. So, throughout the late 13th and early 14th and late 14th, early 15th centuries, France and England were at war a lot of the time uh, because England was trying to claim the throne. It got so bad that at one point about half of France was ruled from London. Alright, mercantilism, and we got a level 3 advisor for cheap, so let's take him. Jean-Baptiste Colbert. Nice. And we can turn off our forts to make up for the difference there. We don't need all of those on right now anyway. And what we want, it really, we can deal with either. Either the English will surrender Maine to us, or we'll have to fight them for it. It's easier if we get to fight them for it. The Pope excommunicated me, the jerk. It's because he controls Avignon and he wants my French clay. We're not going to let him have it. But the excommunication is not a huge deal. Hmm. Do I want to do this? I don't want to piss off my vassals, so I won't do that. Right, so we are losing a little bit of money, but it is nothing major at all. Wonder if I can get the Pope to lift that excommunication. Oh, and we've allied one of the Pope's rivals. That's not a good thing. The Pope does not like Provence. And tonight we are drinking Maker's Mark Bourbon. It's an American whiskey, but it's got a French name, so close enough. Yeah, in France, you start off with some pretty decent kings. So Charles VII is actually the king in the story of Joan of Arc, or Jeanne d'Arc, as my French Canadian ancestors would say. The Maid of Orleans, which is actually, I'm going to cover this in my upcoming episode in the main series. The city of Orleans is actually named for the Emperor Aurelian. When he reincorporated the Gallic Empire back into the Roman Empire, he renamed it after himself, and over time, it changed from Aurelianum, I believe, to Orleans. And yeah, and we want to be improving our relations with our Orleans is our highest development duchy, so or our highest nah, I don't really want to conquer Italy right now. I will take that free stability though. All right, and it should have fired by now. There we go. Okay, England declares war on me. This gets easy because of my vassal swarm. What did I get? There we go. La Guerre du Cent Ans, the Hundred Years' War, and we get some free army morale out of it with these missions, expanded missions. Oh, I also found my pretty map mod called Europa Reborn. It makes the map look all very beautiful, and hopefully it doesn't nuke my computer. But we'll find out, I guess. All right, detach siege. I can't get through Burgundy because they rivaled me, but hopefully my vassals will move into Burgundian territory and siege down Calais for me. Mm, yeah, screw the Pope right about now. I'm kind of sick of dealing with him. Yeah, if you're France and you ally Provence, which you usually will do in the early game, you can almost guarantee you'll get excommunicated because the Pope wants to take over this territory here. And Avignon itself is a weird anomaly where briefly there were two popes. I say briefly, it was for quite a while. There were two popes, one in Rome, one in Avignon, and They did not get along all that well, and papal control of Avignon is something of a relic from that era. All right, there we go. They're sieging down Calais. I won't be able to take it in this war. Usually, they've made it much harder for France to just absorb all of the English territories in France in one go. Um, what I'm hoping happens is England tries to land an army because we can absolutely obliterate them at this stage in the game. Hey there, welcome to the stream. I decided to try my luck with RNGesus once again and see if I can get away with a France run this time. The last one turned out pretty poorly. So, in typical France stuff, we're at war with England. I will probably go back to that. I was feeling lucky tonight, so I figured I'd give France another go. That was my first stream I tried France. It didn't go well. I must have done something to piss off RNGesus that day, but every single thing was going against me. So I was feeling lucky today, so I figured I'd try it again. I will be going back to Russia, though. Okay, the War of the Roses just fired, so England is about to have a very rough time. Now, I have seen them sort this out very quickly. I'm hoping that doesn't happen. I want the War of the Roses to drag on and tire England out. Which actually, the War of the Roses was the basis for Game of Thrones. George R. R. Martin borrowed rather heavily from the actual history there. You can even see it in the two warring families in the War of the Roses were the houses of York and Lancaster. And if those sound familiar, um, they should, because that was the basis for the houses of Stark and Lannister. And we got okay. Those are rebels from England. That's weird. Anyway, so War of the Roses was the basis for Game of Thrones, and honestly, the real history is a little bit crazier. It didn't have dragons or anything, but it was just as convoluted. We'll take that mercantilism. Yeah, these forts take forever in the early game because you don't have any cannons. Eventually, we are going to want to break the alliance with Provence and take their territory because Border Gore is disgusting and I don't want to look at it. Like, yeah, the vassal swarm made France more powerful at this stage in the game, but I mean, look at this. Look at this Border Gore. It's just gross. Nobody likes that. Granted, if you've ever played Crusader Kings, the Border Gore in that is so much worse. I mean, that game just takes it to an absurd degree. But the actual medieval era, if you were to look at an actual map of Europe in terms of all the different tiny political entities that made it up during the medieval era, oh my god, it was disgusting. You have exclaves on exclaves on exclaves. It was the Holy Roman Empire was a nightmare. Um, we'll keep the clergy happy for now. Actually, I have my computer up. Let me see if I can't find you an example. Okay, here we go. That's what I'm talking about. That was the HRE, the real HRE. And this is the cleaned up version we get in game, but this is, and even this is a bit cleaned up, but this is the sort of mess that medieval Europe was. It's part of what makes studying it so interesting is the politics were all very personal. I mean, they kind of had to be, but it's what happens if you try to build an entire political system on incest. I mean, it's entertaining to watch centuries down the line, but I doubt it was as entertaining for the poor peasants going to die for said inbred lunatics. This siege of Ken is going forever. It's fine though, we have ticking war scores, so the longer we let it go, the longer this will run up. It's fine with me. Because then, no, our main goal here is we want to stop Burgundy, Brittany, and Spain from cutting in on our territory. So we're definitely going to want to take Co, Laborde, and Bordeaux, take Maine, and usually I'll try to take Cotentin. And we won't have much of a coalition to deal with, so I'm just going to let that tick up. Well, I mean, they already hated us, so what does it matter? And we can just kind of let our manpower regenerate as well. Actually, while I'm at it, I'm going to turn on my war taxes. Hopefully we can start making some money. You know, I can probably turn off my forts too. Um, England's army, especially after the War of the Roses, is in no real position to fight me. And that's the thing. France, I mean, they have their reputation of being better lovers than fighters today, but there was a time when they could do both very, very well. And that was roughly this time period. Well, roughly after the 15th century, but France for a while was the single most dominant military power in Europe for the entirety of this period, basically. That sounds weird for anyone who studied World War II history. You probably think of the French as Jeremy Clarkson once put it, as cheese eating surrender monkeys, but it couldn't be further from the truth. Take that as free points because all of our estates are happy and loyal. Renaissance. I'm waiting for them to get up just a little bit more so I can start seizing more land. Because if you can get the estates happy with you, you can just start taking land. And did the Iberian wedding happen? No, they're just not a great power anymore. All right. Yeah, once Spain unites, they can be a little bit of a problem for France, but not really. Um, but especially once you get Elan going, which is one of France's ideas are some of the best in the game. Um, yeah, I'll keep the nobility happy. I'm already losing money. What does it matter? Um, France's national ideas are absurdly good. You get extra diplomatic relations, 20% morale, more taxes. You can basically colonize for free. Um, Fort maintenance, tech cost, and religious tolerance, and then 5% discipline when it's all said and done. The only better national ideas are Prussia's, which Brandenburg doesn't get anymore, which has made Germany runs a bit more difficult because as Brandenburg, you're almost certainly gonna have to fight Prussia or fight Poland at some point to form Prussia. Yeah, you don't have it as easy as the historical Prussians did. They just got lucky and inherited the duchy from a cadet branch of the Hohenzollerns. Let's see, if I can piece them out for a good chunk of change, I will do that. Alright, I'll take that deal. I can always come back and take the rest later. Brittany is probably not going to step in and do anything, so we're fine. We will just let England stew for a little while. And and focus on integrating our vassals. All right, we are making money again. That is always good to see. Let's ignore all these guys. I don't want to tangle with their wars. And because those are cores, we really don't have to worry about revolts. So I'm just going to set my men to train and start integrating my vassals. And that is the story of this era, was the decline of the feudal system, which had been building up for centuries since the decline of the Roman Empire. And feudal politics were extremely personal, and they didn't really care much for culture or religion. It's religion to a degree, but culture more so. So in the Holy Roman Empire, you have Germans, Italians, and Czechs all thrown together in one giant superstate, and it kind of worked, largely because they were all Catholics and because local customs were largely respected under feudalism. The feudal lords typically wouldn't go messing with local customs because they didn't want to have an ethnic revolt on their hands. But that all kind of starts to change in this time period as we see kings start to assert their control over their territory much more. And France is really the poster boy for this in this period because the French kings, for a long time, were beholden to a bunch of nobles who wielded way more power than the king in Paris. And what the Hundred Years' War does, it essentially just slaughters so much of the French nobility that the king is able to just swoop in and take up a lot of their land himself. All right, there's our opportunity. I don't want to fight Austria. We'll let Provence fight its own battles, and we will take some of their territory once they're done. Because once we've ended the Hundred Years' War, we should get free claims on all of England's, or on all of Provence's territory. And yet, Provence in this time was kind of a vassal of France. This is the issue with the feudal system, really, is it is very easy for kingdoms to, or for duchies and particularly border territories to break off and maintain nominal independence. That's what Burgundy is right now. In this period, they technically recognized the king in France as their rightful ruler, but that didn't mean diddly. They did not give a shit because the French king couldn't assert his control over them. But after the Hundred Years' War, that got much easier because, again, he gained control of a lot more of the kingdom, and that gave him a hell of a lot more control, and more money, and more land. Alright, we will state these territories. Very good. How did Burgundy piss off Spain? Yeah, we'll help our merchants. Okay, it's not Spain. They must be renting their army or something. Yeah, you can rent out your armies these days, which is actually how my ancestors got to America. During the 18th century, a lot of German princes had built up their armies for a war that didn't happen. So they had these professional forces they were hoping to get some return on investment for, and the British wound up hiring a lot of them. Now, most of those Germans wound up going to England to maintain the home territory, while British regulars went overseas to fight the American rebels. Um, but they did eventually bring some German soldiers over. Now, the thing about mercenaries is they are only loyal so long as you're giving them the best offer. And what the Americans did was very smart. They extended an offer to any and all Germans who were serving in the British Army that if they defected, enlisted men would get something along the lines of 25 acres, and officers would get 50 acres. And a lot of particularly unattached young men who had nothing to go back to in Germany took that offer. It was a pretty good deal. You got free land, which is always nice, but especially back in the day. And my ancestors, okay, there we go. We got the Iberian wedding. And my ancestors were some of those Germans actually from Prussia who defected and fought for the revolution and then settled somewhere in rural Pennsylvania before working their way to down to my neck of the woods. Yeah, but in this period, Germany was a mess. This game doesn't really do it justice. It does the best it can to kind of illustrate the sheer border gore and political fuckery that was going on in Germany at this time. But it was even worse looking than this. Um, Numerous states that weren't even connected to each other. Brandenburg had its core territory here, Hinterpommern here, Prussia here, and then a smattering of territories in the Rhineland and West Germany. And that was just how it worked. Administering all of that was a mess because there was no road network unifying them. It was awful and a huge headache to actually try to exert any amount of control over. Eventually, though, in the Napoleonic Wars, Prussia gained control of most of the Rhineland, which even today is the core of Germany's industry. All right, we're going to have to deal with the prestige loss until our king is dead. Hopefully that happens soon. Oh, and I have this road network mod installed, which I very much enjoy. Um, the benefits to your individual provinces are pretty negligible, but it's a lot of fun to play with from a role playing standpoint because as kings centralized their territories and gained deeper control over them, they are able to actually build infrastructure projects for the first time in a very long time. I don't really need the unrest because I have no unrest right now because everything's cored and I don't have any wrong culture territory. All right, there's Orleans, so we are going to improve relations here, and January should have ticked over, so we should be able to integrate. All right, there we go. I'll take the prestige. And we can take an idea group. Do I want to ally Scotland? I'll ally Scotland. England or France and Scotland did have a historical alliance because of their mutual enemy in England. The Scots called it the Old Alliance, and I am actually unaware if the French had a special name for it, but it was the main reason England played nicer with Scotland in this period. It's because Scotland had a big mean friend just south of the Channel. A big mean friend who had a history of kicking the shit out of English armies and Austrian armies and a lot of other armies. The French were kind of badass back in the day. Speaking of, when is my truce with? All right, still got a while before that truce is up. I don't really want to expand much, but I'll extend all these monopolies and get that money. The right in the middle, the pink right in the middle. Yes, that's one of my vassals. I'm actually integrating them right now. Um, I mean, in this game, vassals are kind of expressed as territories you rule indirectly, and it's Crusader Kings. Well, yeah, it is nice. And especially if you're trying to take over territory that's the wrong religion or the wrong culture for you. So actually, this is a strategy I see often in Russia. Actually, is they will release an Islamic vassal down here and use that to take over the Islamic territories until they get their religious ideas going. It's a good way of absorbing cultures and religions foreign to your own. But these are all same culture, same religion, so I'm just gonna eat them up because it boosts my development, and I lose the vassal swarm, but I make a lot more money. What I'm hoping will happen is the Burgundian inheritance. If it doesn't, it's no big deal. But I'm gonna have eventually have to fight these guys to take over this because this is some of the richest land in Europe. And Burgundy was a bit of a weird bird in this period. They were a bit larger than a vassal, but not quite than like a vassal duchy, but not quite big enough to really be a kingdom. Because Burgundy controls Flanders, Brabant, and Holland over here, most of the Low Countries, through personal unions. Now, again, while they technically recognized the King of France as their overlord, the lords of Burgundy, more often than not, had designs on their own independent kingdom, separate from France. And they really did try, but eventually the Duke of Burgundy died, and the Austrians came in. And historically, what happened is the territories were split. Austria got most of it, but the French got most of the French-speaking regions of it. Um, and then the Duchess of Austria died by falling off her horse, and it became fully integrated into Austria. And one of those weird deaths that works out very well for individuals and kingdoms. And the other thing about France is these in this period, these were some of the richest, most well-developed lands in Europe. Um, Paris at this point was one of the largest cities on the continent. Not what it is today, but still huge. And these were just incredibly wealthy territories, and that's part of why France became so powerful as the king exerted his control over the indirectly ruled vassal parts of the kingdom. It's just so much money, so many men, so much control over Europe's trade networks. France was destined to become a powerhouse. And I mean, I would say France has probably the best geography in Europe. Even more so. All right, we have all right. Our queen is cheating on us. Let's see if we can get the Pope. All right, he's not going to do it. Oh well, we are excommunicated after all. Anyway, so France has almost the best geography in Europe. So you have rich farmlands up here. You have mountainous borders here. Sea borders, mountains, sea, sea. The only weak spot is right here, which for most of France's history wasn't that big of a deal because there was no real threat on the other side of the Rhine until Germany united. So France here is protected from five of the six directions it could feasibly be attacked from. It has access to the Mediterranean, the North Sea, and the Atlantic and the English Channel. It has huge internal river networks in the Seine and the Loire, and I forget the name of this river over here, but we can get that. Yeah, Seine, Loire, and I forget this river too, and Rhone, and they again helped internal trade and developed cities like Lyon and Paris itself. Yeah, France was destined to become a superpower. Sort of in the same way that England was. England is, but mostly for the reason that England is near impossible to actually invade. That's also why France's military was so good back in the day. They needed it to be because they had land borders they actually had to deal with. They couldn't just turtle up on an island and rely on their navy to do all the work. And, well, once the English integrated Scotland, it became almost impossible to actually get at them. Napoleon made an effort, but after Trafalgar, the the French Navy was at the time the only navy that could at all rival England, and even then not by much. So after Trafalgar, when the French Navy is completely demolished by Admiral Nelson, who was a one-armed badass, by the way, I might do a snippets of history on him. Yeah, missing his left arm, it was taken off by a cannonball, and he was still a badass naval captain right up until the day he died. Which I think, if I remember right, was actually at Trafalgar. But it also saw the HMS Victory, which is far and away the coolest ship of that era. It was enormous. I mean, it still is. It's just permanently docked in London these days. But the HMS Victory was the largest ship of the age of sail, and it was enormous. It had, if I remember right, over 1,000 crew. It was absurd. We'll take that mercantilism. Meanwhile, the French Navy was often competent, but it really was not their focus. Actually, as Americans, as an American, I owe the French Navy quite a debt of gratitude because they were the main reason we were able to hold our own at sea with the British at all during the Revolution. Because most of the American Navy, if you want to call it that at the time, was little more than civilian vessels with some guns strapped to them. The French brought actual warships to the party. And at the Battle of the Chesapeake, they showed that they could fight the English if they had to. It's just they didn't have the same kind of numbers the English did. They didn't have the same kind of naval training the English did. So the British were going to win, especially if they had a numerical advantage. But the French Navy was pretty darn good, all things considered. I mean, and even up into World War One, the French Navy was the dominant naval power in the Mediterranean until the Italians united, and then the Italian fleet became the dominant Mediterranean sea power, which makes sense because Italy is entirely dependent upon the Mediterranean for its continued prosperity. And yeah, I'm drinking Maker's Mark tonight. It's bourbon, but do I want what do I want? I can't lose prestige. Um, I'll keep the clergy happy. All right, we are not excommunicated anymore. We just got to make sure the Pope is happy. I mean, we are going to have to go to war with the Pope eventually, but not right now. Nice, nice. I figured it might be an American whiskey, but it has a French name, so close enough. All right, there we go. The Pope likes us again, so we don't have to worry about excommunication. Um, yeah, once Orleans is integrated, we're going to focus on Armagnac, which is another delicious liquor. Um, I think I like cognac more, but they're both tasty. Actually, if you're looking for a recommendation, Sarmagnac is some delicious, relatively cheap cognac you can get. It's roughly $21 a bottle. It is very sweet, almost caramelly. I like it quite a lot. It's kind of hard to find though. But when you do find it, it will not break the bank to get it. So if you've never had cognac and want to try it, you could do worse than Sarmagnac. I would say it's better than something like Courvoisier, which is about $16 more per bottle. So definitely go with Sarmagnac if you can find it. Courvoisier is definitely the more common of the two, though, or Hennessy maybe. But Sarmagnac is the best for the price. Yeah, you can blow a lot of money on liquor if you don't know what to look for. I like my whiskey. That's most of what I drink, liquor wise. Usually Irish whiskey, but I've been getting much more into American bourbons lately. All right, we should be coming up on that truce. All right, 3 more years, and we can go to war with England again, and then we should be able to take all the rest of Normandy, and maybe Calais too. I will take those exiles. Screw Austria. France has that problem today. High unemployment. It is actually a serious problem. Um, as part of this, France's economy is a little bit messed up these days. It's one of the strongest in Europe, but it fell behind Germany largely because of the governmental policies of Charles de Gaulle, where the French government got heavily invested in the French economy and has kind of slowed it down considerably. Whereas in Germany, the industry was kind of let to go on its own. I mean, and that's why German industry is like world renowned for what it is. Um, Meanwhile, in France, you have big companies, but they're kind of held back by government interference in a lot of ways. The state holds shares in a lot of French companies, and it was just came down to how they spent the money they got from the U.S. after the war. Germany spent most of its money rebuilding its infrastructure and giving its businesses a good environment to operate in, whereas France has kind of invested directly into its industries, and that has slowed them down considerably. State run industries generally don't work all that well, and even when the state interferes in industries, it kind of slows them down. I don't want to ally them because I am going to have to go to war with them to take over Anjou, Verdun, Barrois, and okay, Lorraine has broken free. So that's going to be a problem because they're probably going to join the HRE, which means I'm probably going to have to fight Austria to get at them. Which it won't be a huge problem, it'll just be a pain in the ass. Maybe I can ally Hungary. They probably won't go right to war with Austria, but it'll be nice to kind of diplomatically isolate the Austrians. Hungary is an interesting story, actually, in European history. It's the superpower that might have been. Had they not bordered the Ottomans, who knows what Hungary could have done? I mean, they're in a pretty good location. They have very rich farmlands, and they're relatively well protected. The interior of the country is a large flat plain, but they're protected on the north and east by the Carpathians, and to the south and west by the Balkans. They just bordered a much bigger, meaner threat in the form of the Ottomans, who for some reason have decided to let the Byzantines survive in Corinth. That is weird. Usually they just take them over outright. I can take another idea. Take that construction cost reduction. There we go. We lost our awesome treasurer. I'll take the inflation reduction. Of course, and the Diplo rep. Oh no, he might be too expensive. No, I can take the Diplo rep. That'll help with integrating my vassals. And do I have enough money? Yes, I do have enough money left over for the discipline guy. Alright, so we are sitting pretty for that war with England. Our manpower is full. I'll get another full stack of 20 down here. And we are good for that war when that truce expires next year. And this will be even easier. Who's England friends with? All right, they have Portugal and Utrecht, and actually Portugal and England were historical allies. Even today, it's the alliance between Portugal and England is the longest standing military alliance in the world. It's been active since roughly the 14th century. Um, Still in effect in its same form. Um, And actually, Portugal only really exists because a bunch of English crusaders decided to stop off in Iberia on their way to the Holy Land and fuck around in Western Iberia, um, which led to the founding of the Kingdom of Portugal. Yeah, we're doing fine with prestige. Um, but no, it still stands today. It's actually a pretty cool story. We're gonna have to fight them. Portugal's not much of a military threat. Uh, I can have one army fight the English while the other one fights the Portuguese, and it won't even be that difficult. All right, yeah, we have I believe, a permanent claim. No, just a normal claim. All right, so eventually we will get permanent claims on that territory, and we will have to fight the Pope. Burgundy is expanding. That's not great. I'll help you out, Genoa. All right, and we lost our other fantastic general from the start of the game, so we're gonna have to hire a new one. Yeah, you start with two really good generals, and then it takes you a long time to build up your military tradition until you can actually hire other really good generals. And actually, this is another interesting thing. France was one of the first European nations to integrate a permanent and standardized taxation system. Up until this point, it was kind of difficult for a lot of medieval kings to collect taxes because your vassals would skim off the top. It was easier to hide them. So France instituted one of the first permanent, stable taxation systems in the world. And yeah, this game comes to an end largely when the French Revolution happened. But this is the golden age of the French monarchy. This is when the French monarchy was truly at the height of its power. And I feel like so many people associate France with Republican values today. They forget that it was like the monarchist nation. Um, the only other country I think of. Hey there, welcome to the stream. We're doing a France game. Trying to my first stream I did France, and RNG just didn't like me. So we are trying to see if we can right that wrong this time. But at the time, the only other nation that was on par with France in terms of how autocratic its king was Imperial Russia. Um, I mean, it goes like Louis the 14th, a man a man so arrogant he called himself the Sun King. Um, is famous for the l'état c'est moi, or the I am the state. Um, that's the kind of attitude both the French kings and the Russian czars had. It didn't work out all that well for them during the Age of Revolution. Your grandfather in this game? Hmm. But anyway, so actually, if you go to Paris today, you can still see a lot of remnants of the Sun King. Like he put his face on everything. Like balconies, you'll see like these wrought iron balconies with the golden face. Oh, that is interesting, actually. I know there are a few descendants of European and Ottoman nobility still hanging around. That's really cool. Um, as far as I'm aware, the last living descendant of Osman Oglu directly is, I believe he's an English comedian. I'm blanking on his name though. But yeah, the deposed nobility got around, especially. The Habsburgs are still around. So are the Hohenzollerns. The Bourbons are still around as the kings of Spain. Um, do you know exactly who you're descended from? Oh, that is actually really really cool. Do you still have the name, or do you have a different family name? Very nice. Uh, I am a very distant relation of Charlemagne if you go back far enough. I have some French ancestry that came to Quebec, so you're it's I think a lot of people are related to nobility. They just aren't aware of it. I mean, eventually, a lot of those nobles had so many small cadet branches and so many members of the minor nobility. They just kind of were as impoverished as a lot of the other people. So I would wager more people have some amount of noble descent than they're aware of. But that is really really cool that you're able to trace it back to the Ottoman dynasty. Always a cool thing to know about yourself. I'll take the stability. Actually, some interesting history about the Ottomans in the United States. I'm blanking on the guy's name, but he was like second or third in line to the Ottoman throne when the empire fell. He wound up becoming very good friends with a Baltimorean diplomat called Theodore Marburg. And I've actually read correspondence between the two. His name was Mehmet Osmanoglu, but I can't remember wherein. I know he wasn't the main heir. I just know that he was in line, and he actually also became friends with Otto von Habsburg, who was the last Habsburg to rule Austria, or the last Habsburg heir. Yes, he did. Mehmet II was a very interesting guy. Um, in many ways, almost a prototype of a Renaissance king. Um, very much a patron of the arts, and a fascinating figure. I don't know as much about Ottoman history as I probably should. Um, but this Mehmet wasn't him. This Mehmet was living sometime in the 1920s and 30s. Um, Pretty darn far from home. Yes, the Ottomans had a. I mean, both them and Austria really were kind of the sick men of Europe. Um, but a few of them did end up in the States. He married an American woman, if I remember right. I did all this work for an internship where I wound up studying Marburg quite a lot. Um, but yeah, he was in America for a while along with von Habsburg, and I just find it fun that the the children of two age-old enemies like that, like the Ottomans and the Austrians, went at it like cats and dogs. But here, the deposed descendants of both dynasties were friends in early 20th century America. Granted, it was a weird time, and strange times make for strange bedfellows. So, interesting tidbit about that Ottoman descendant: he was a virtuoso pianist. One of those weird facts that I learned about these people when I was studying them. I also learned that Stonewall Jackson spoke fluent Spanish, believe it or not. Let's check in on the. I do fully agree with that. Um, I say it in the intro to my podcast where if you know where you've been, you can figure out where you're going. But if you have no connection to your history, you're rootless. You got nothing really. Um, History is important on a personal level and on a societal level. And I mean, I know that knowing my family's history to the degree that I can. I mean, I'm largely descended from commoners, so there's not a whole lot until they get to the New World. But it has enriched my life quite a bit. I know that I can trace my mother's side back to 17th century French settlers in Quebec. I can trace my father's side all the way back to German mercenaries who defected and fought for the Americans during the Revolution. And it's just cool knowing my connection to history in a way. And yeah, I'm not really descended from anybody that important. Not directly. I mean, like, Charlemagne is so far distant, it's not even close. But it it is nice knowing my connection to the events that I actually study. And if you have the opportunity, I highly encourage everybody to look into their family history as much as they can. I know it can get a little bit confusing with names and genetics, but it's easier than ever with things like 23andMe and the like. Definitely do it if you get the chance. Um, it's through that I figured out I am a very distant relation to Justin Trudeau, actually. He is loosely related to the Provos. Don't quite know how I feel about that. I'm an American uh, from East Coast, Maryland. I am assimilation mission complete as far as the French ancestry goes. Um, but my family comes from. I have never had any real affinity for language. There was a time when I could speak a little bit of Russian. That's the only language I've ever been actually decent at. I tried taking classes at my local community college, but they had to cancel them due to lack of interest. Um, but yeah, there was a time when I could speak a little bit of Russian. And in high school, I could stumble my way through a conversation in French. Um, I went to France and I was able to competently ask for the bathroom and order at a restaurant. Uh, but I'm just not gifted in that way. I do have a cousin who is absurdly good. She's fluent in Chinese. Um, I also have some linguistically gifted aunts and uncles who speak like five or six different languages between them, but I didn't get any of those genes. I compensate for it by being pretty darn good at English, so it is what it is. Yeah, we'll educate the poor people. I do not. It. I like the language. I was curious about when I was looking for languages to learn. I actually considered that. Um, but the only classes I could find that I was really interested in were the Russian ones. I couldn't find a Turkish class anywhere near me. But I do very much enjoy Middle Eastern history, and I actually did a series on the Crusades where I covered quite a bit of early Turkish history, going back to what was his name, Alp Arslan, and the early. That is true, and Turkish history is fascinating for a lot of reasons. But one of the main ones is they kind of absorbed a lot from the cultures they found themselves in. They were much like the Mongols. They started out as horse nomads, and once they settled in Persia, they absorbed a good bit of that culture and a bit of Arabic in there too. Um, but I have studied the early Turks, the Alp Arslan and the Seljuks. Um, my knowledge of the Turkish history starts to peter out towards the end of the Crusades when we start getting into the rise of the Ottomans. But I know the Seljuks pretty well. I know the Sultanate of Rum pretty well, just from my studies of the Crusades. Yes, he did. He was quite a gifted general. And that was an interesting situation where it was a combination of a very competent general and a very disorganized Byzantine military. Part of the problem there is the Byzantines had numerical superiority at that battle. The problem was about half the troops were, yes, you did, about half the troops were completely disloyal to the Basilius, and when half your army flees the battle, you can't really do much to actually resist. He was actually one of the few Roman emperors captured in battle. Actually, just covered the first one captured in battle was Valerian, who was captured by the Persians during the crisis of the third century. Um, what was his name? I'm blanking on the name of the Byzantine emperor in the Battle of Manzikert. But I know he was of the Dukas dynasty. I also there was also what was his name? I Another Byzantine emperor was captured by the Bulgars, and his skull was made into a drinking glass by the Bulgar Khan Krum. Thank you. I like to think I'm putting that history degree to good work. I I don't have much of an outlet for it in my day job, so I like to let it out here in the podcast. For the 2021 series, I put it up to a vote on my Twitter, and I asked people what they wanted, and it came down to, it was a two-way vote really coming into the end between a history of Islam 632 to 1453 and the decline and fall of the Roman Empire roughly 180 to 476. And the Roman Empire won by about a third more votes than Islam. But an Islam series, which would cover a lot of early Turkish history, is definitely on the books. I would love to do one. So stick around. You might get to see one that covers your ancestors. But for right now, I'm doing the decline of Rome, which is an important period to understand, but one that not a lot of people understand. From my experience, most Roman history classes cut out right around the end of the Pax Romana, and I'm picking up right there. That's the beginning of my current series. Is end of the Pax Romana into the Byzantine Empire and early medieval period. And actually, I think my truce with England is up, so I can go back to war with them. My first series covered my first series covered what is going to end. Yes, it is. It might have started as an Arab religion, but the Arabs kind of peter out in Islamic history relatively early. The Umayyads are really the biggest Arab dynasty, and once you get into the Abbasids, it is pretty much out of the hands of the Arabs. Um, the Abbasids might technically have been Arabs, but they relied so heavily on the Persians that they're arguably more of a Persian dynasty than they were an Arab dynasty. And then shortly afterwards, you get the arrival of the Turks in Persia, and they really shake things up. Um, I make a joke that history is a succession of horse nomads from Central Asia with bow and arrow who come up to melt the faces off of sedentary societies every once in a while. The Ottomans, well, the Turks, and later the Ottomans were kind of the next to last version of that. The Mongols were kind of the apex Central Asian horse nomads, but the Turks had quite a role to play in Islamic history. Actually, it's interesting. From what I've read of the period, they had a lot of their complaint with the Arabs is they thought the Arabs had become rather soft and weak relative to what they viewed themselves as, and unfit to be the leaders of the Islamic world. Yeah, the Altaic peoples have and I say Altaic peoples even though they're pretty widespread, but there's a lot of linguistic similarities between the Turks and the Mongols, and I mean Central Asia itself is a fascinating region to study because it's the meeting place of it's where Europe and Asia kind of meet in the middle, and its history is unfortunately not as well known as it probably should be, simply because a lot of those horse nomads didn't write much down until they come into contact with sedentary peoples. Um, but I mean, the blueprint for them would be the Huns. They were really some of the first, but there are successive migrations out of Central Asia by various horse nomad peoples. who almost universally are very good at the. Oh, don't you worry about it at all. Um, I actually have a lot of German readers of the blog segment of my podcast, so I do not worry about it at all. But no, the I like Turkish history. It is very interesting simply because it touches so many things. Um, the Turks start out as this relatively small tribe that's Islamized during the initial Arab outpouring and initial Islamic conquests, but they come back centuries later and just become this indomitable force in the Islamic world. And I mean, they almost take the gates of Vienna several times. I actually did a snippets of history covering the Polish role at the Battle of Vienna in 1684, when the Ottomans were routed by winged hussars, and that was really the beginning of Ottoman decline. They never quite came back from that, and it's a shame because they were a real cultural powerhouse in the region too. But throughout most of the 18th century, the Ottomans had a rough go of things. And actually, one of the things that annoys me about the more recent patches of this game is the Ottomans are not what they used to be. I mean, sometimes AI Ottomans would conquer the entirety of the Middle East and Persia and everything. Now they struggle to capture Egypt, which again happened relatively quickly in Ottoman histories. They conquered Egypt like that. It was crazy. Um, but then again, when you're producing rulers whose nicknames are, if I remember right, like the Thunderbolt, you tend to be pretty good at fighting things. Uh, Actually, he was an interesting one, and I did do a series about Timur. Fun fact about him. So, in the 20th century, when the Soviet anthropologists and archaeologists discovered his tomb, they saw a curse written above the burial site that said like something along the lines of if you dig me up, you will release a conqueror far worse than I am. And then roughly a month or two later, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. So maybe there might have been something to Timur's curse. I don't know. Also, I am a couple whiskeys in, so forgive me if I get some of the small details wrong. Yeah, I don't know why Paradox decided to nerf the Ottomans in the latest patch. They were a good endgame boss, basically, for playing Russia or Austria. Now, not so much. Now they struggle to break out of Anatolia. Like, Hungary, at this point in most of the games I've played before the 1.3 patch, Hungary had almost been completely absorbed by the Ottomans at this point. They used to be just ridiculous. They used to be way stronger than they were historically, and they've kind of overcompensated by going in the other direction. Um, what do I want to do here? I will give them that land and take the free base tax. Yeah, the Young Turks regime was something else, and they were almost as vicious anti-monarchists as the French revolutionaries were. Um, it's a shame what happened to a lot of those old dynasties. Like, I mean, the Romanovs are still around, but they ain't what they used to be, and they weren't able to return to Russia for a long time. I think they have now, though. And then actually, I remember a year or two ago, I read an article of the last king of Romania who died. He was driven out by communists and wasn't allowed to return to his homeland until he died. I mean, he was exiled in England. But I mean, you may know. I am aware that one of the last living direct descendants of the Ottomans is a stand-up comedian in England, but I cannot for the life of me remember his name. Which I mean, some of the Ottomans are probably getting a kick out of that from wherever they are. But yeah, the Young Turks were something else. Actually, a lot of European nobility wound up getting kicked out of their homelands during the World Wars, and I remember a quote from it was the King of England. I believe it was George the sixth or seventh. Anyway, he just commenting on the what time is it? It is late. It's about 9 o'clock. Eastern Time Zone, United States. Oh, that is like 4:11 a.m. or p.m. We're extending that monopoly. Bursa, I've heard of that. Where that's in the western part of the country, isn't it? I could be wrong. Okay, so that actually might be in the game. Yeah, I don't know the geography of that region probably as well as I should. But that is actually really one of the things I've loved about this podcast is being able to interact with people from around the world. Um, Weirdly enough, the largest number of listeners I've had internationally are from Indonesia. But it is really cool that well, the internet allows literally anyone from anywhere in the world to have a conversation. And then I believe Ankara, or relatively close to it, was also a capital, right? I know it's the capital of modern Turkey, but yes, okay. Um, yeah, I know that that has a historical basis as being a capital of the region, but yeah, I know that Ataturk was pretty desperate to sever any connection to the Ottoman royalty, which is why he renamed Constantinople and moved the capital. Because I mean, the Ottomans called it Constantinople throughout their history, and a lot of Ottoman emperors kind of tried to claim a descent from the Roman Empire. I mean, in terms of territory, they were relatively correct. Religion was the big issue there, where the Russians claimed to be heirs of Rome from a religious standpoint, but the Ottomans did preserve Constantinople and actually built it into. They kind of resuscitated the city because towards the end of the Byzantine Empire, it was struggling. Um, it had been depopulated, had suffered a few earthquakes, and had really fallen on poor fortunes, considering it was a city that was once called the Queen of Cities. Um, yeah, I'm definitely claiming Provence. Um, yes, that is one interesting thing about the Ottoman Empire is they were very religiously tolerant. I was more saying that in terms of the state religion. Part of the Russian claim to being the third Rome is they viewed themselves as the continuation of the Roman Church from their perspective. But the Ottomans were really ahead of their time when it came to religious tolerance in the empire. The only other country roughly around the same time that had a similar degree of religious acceptance would have been the Netherlands. Um, but the millet system itself was rather ingenious for controlling such a diverse population. Because it wasn't just Christians; it was they had a few different sects of Islam in their territory as well. But ingenious in terms of administration. Um, really well put together government, especially for the period. Actually, that is one of the interesting mechanics about the Ottomans in this game. They're one of the only nations that doesn't convert aggressively. But I mean, that's it was an interesting fusion of convenience and necessity because when half your territory is Christian, if you tried to forcibly convert them, you would have a massive revolt on their hands. So the Ottomans had to be rather clever in how they actually handled it, which in the millet system was a pretty darn good way of dealing with a ethnically and religiously diverse society. And I mean, realistically, historically, there have only been two methods of controlling a society that's very diverse. You either have to give a lot of local autonomy to the various peoples that make up your empire, like the Persians did, or you have to force everybody to get on the same page culturally, like the Romans did. That's usually how you make it work, because the Roman model is largely what was adopted in Western Europe after the fact. But the Persian model was actually kind of similar to what the Russians were using too. The Russians were very hands off with their Islamic population. As long as they paid their taxes to the Tsar, they were fine to do whatever the hell they wanted. And it actually helped out the Russian monarchy quite a bit because during the Russian Civil War, a large portion of the White Army, which was an assortment of monarchists, Republicans, and liberals, was made up of Muslims from Central Asia who were loyal to the Tsar. A lot of the Kazakhs and the other Central Asian peoples were very much in favor of the Tsar retaining power. Granted, Russia was kind of the great reactionary power of the era. They were the great sort of conservative right wing entity in Europe from the Napoleonic era onward. But Ottoman Constantinople is one of those places. If they ever invent time travel, that's one of the first places I'm going. Uh, I don't want to fight that war. Ottoman Constantinople, St. Petersburg of the Romanovs, Paris of the Belle Epoque, Rome of the Pax Romana, London of the Victorian era. That is true. The Young Turks were an odd regime. Um, Revolutions rarely go all that well. I mean, the French Revolution kind of set the tone pretty early on for just how brutal anti-monarchist revolutions could be. I mean, during the Reign of Terror, a couple dozen people were decapitated every single day. Actually, that's one of my favorite ironies in history. So, yeah, we'll tolerate the true faith. So, one of the greatest ironies in history is Robespierre, who was the architect of the Reign of Terror during the French Revolution. He was a lawyer and known as a very, very capable public speaker. Well, when the revolution eventually comes for him, he tries to commit suicide. He tries to blow his brains out. Well, the bullet misses and rips his tongue out, so he can't speak at his own trial. Which this lawyer, this renowned public speaker who can't speak in his own defense, it was incredibly ironic. And then he was eventually fed to the guillotine like he had fed so many people to it himself. That is the problem with revolutions like the French Revolution. They always eat their own, and that is exactly what happened to Robespierre. But I mean, it's every time you had this new regime come to power, it was rioted against by an even more extreme faction that wanted to push it even further away from the past. And you get Robespierre's reign of terror was nuts. But you get similar lunatics in the Young Turks regime. Thank you. I actually did that relatively recently. I had a full beard for the longest time, but my girlfriend uh, kind of put the idea in my head to try a mustache, and I always wondered that is that a cultural thing? Because I do know a lot of Turkish sultans had pretty killer mustaches. Also, I will say, do not feel ashamed for your English at all. It is very good. Your English is better than a lot of Americans I know, actually. Um, I remember a one of my favorite professors in college gave a full-blown English lesson to a bunch of uh, junior and senior students because they were not very good at their own language. And she had no sympathy for anybody. She was Italian. Oh, it's really I can understand you perfectly. Do not worry about it at all. Um, but this one of my favorite professors in college. She was Italian from Tuscany, but she taught herself French, English, and German. And then she studied the ancient Middle East, like the pre-Islamic Middle East. So she knew Sumerian and Egyptian. So she didn't have a whole lot of sympathy for people who couldn't speak their own language all that well. So she spent three entire class periods giving us pretty basic English lessons um, because people were, in all honesty, the American public school system is a bad joke these days. Um, it ain't what it used to be. There are a lot. I know a lot of great teachers. It's just there are a lot of structural problems with it that really handicap its effectiveness. Um, but yeah, yeah. What do you think when you say Turkish? Immediately, what comes to mind? Um, Not kebab. Kebab is delicious, but what comes to mind is sort of like exotic, but a little familiar at the same time, if that makes any sense at all. Because I mean, from my study of history, the Ottomans kind of were the successors of the Byzantines in one very important way, and it was that they were where East and West met each other. They were sort of one of those nations that kind of stuck between the two. Now, the Byzantines leaned more west, the Ottomans leaned more east, but they were very much a fusion of the two, and it's sort of this mixing of the east and the west that I've always found fascinating about Turkish culture in particular. Um, I've heard your coffee is delicious, and I would like to try some. I just can't find any near me. Um, Turkish delight because my parents read me the Chronicles of Narnia when I was a little kid. Um, I suppose that's better than the world knowing you by cheeseburger, which I'd be glad if that's what people knew America by. Um, but no, I would. Turkey is very high on my list of places I would love to visit one day. I have traveled relatively extensively for my age. I've been to a lot of Western Europe, but I'm very interested in seeing Istanbul and Pretty much the entire coast of the Sea of Marmara. It just looks beautiful to me. Um, I'd also love to see Antioch. I am a Catholic, so that city's a pretty big deal to us. It's where it's where the word Christian was actually first used, was in Antioch. And Cappadocia just looks gorgeous. Um, I would love to do the. I always see pictures of like the hot air balloons out there, and I would love to try that because it just looks just geographically gorgeous out there. I also love the subterranean villages that are out there. I'd love to see one of those. But I did go to Berlin, so I did have some pretty decent kebab served to me by some Turkish people who were living there. Um, I would like to try the real authentic thing in Turkey proper, though. But Istanbul just looks like a fun city. Yeah, if you have travel recommendations, I am more than happy to take those. I've been to Italy, Germany, France, England, Ireland, and the Netherlands, but I would really like to broaden my horizons and see a bit more than Western Europe. Um, but no, Turkey looks like a beautiful country, and I would love to visit it. I would like to see Sinope. I don't know what the Turks call it, but back when it was largely Greek, it was called Sinope, because that was where Diogenes was from, and he's one of my favorite philosophers, one of the most interesting guys in the world. Um, every picture I've seen of the Black Sea region is gorgeous, though. One of my favorite YouTubers is from Bulgaria, and every picture he's posted of the beaches there is beautiful. And then there's just so much history in the region too. I remember one of my favorite lessons from Dr. Gadadi's history class was when we covered Gobekli Tepe, which is this ancient. I mean, I'm sure you know what it is. It's just this ancient. Um, Many people think temple in Turkey that dates back to the Neolithic era. It is old. Predates even like the Greeks in the region. It is positively ancient. I would love to see that. Yeah, no, I would love to see that because I've heard so much about it. I've seen it in so many pictures, and I spent an entire college class talking about it. Because that was very much up Dr. Goodadi's alley. She loved the ancient Bronze Age and ancient Near East. I actually one of my favorite classes with her. I had a awesome Egyptian history class where we covered a lot of this stuff. Just the stuff that one of the things that blows my mind. So when the Romans arrived in Egypt, the pyramids were as old to the Romans as the Romans are to modern people. Like when the Romans got to Egypt, the pyramids were already ancient. That is mind blowing to me. And I mean, I come from a country that has a very young history. I mean, the U.S. If you go to U.S. history as early as it goes, is really like the 17th century, the early 17th century, the Jamestown colony, and the first European settlers here. That's at a most generous depiction the earliest American history. And then the first time I went to Europe, I stepped into a building that was older than my entire country, and it snapped my brain clean in half. I walked into Notre Dame Cathedral, and the realization hit me that this building is older than my country by a lot. And Notre Dame is even relatively young by building standards. And then a similar thing happened when I walked into the Vatican. Like, America didn't even remotely exist when this thing was being built, and it just blows my mind. Now, I love American history. I love my own history. We have a very interesting country over here, but it's so young relative to the rest of the world. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just an interesting thing about American history is that we are a very young country, all things considered. I have a lifelong love of history. Um, Actually, I grew up watching the History Channel before it all turned into aliens, and I just fell in love with it from a young age. My parents got me this book on Egyptian history when I was 7 or 8, and I was hooked. And it's just remained that way ever since. And then I had this great teacher in middle school that really just cemented my love of history. And his parents were born during Mussolini's Italy, and they remembered the American invasion, and that was just wild to me. He was a great teacher, but really the world is way more fascinating than a lot of people think, and all it really takes is opening a history book to see it. But it's just it blows my mind with American history just how young this country is. I mean, I might have French and German ancestry and Irish too, but I really consider myself an American. I mean, I can't consider myself anything else. I'm a child of the New World as much as anyone can be. Um, so I love American history. I love my own history, but every once in a while, like every time I come in contact with history that's older than my entire country, it just blows my mind. Like when I was in England, I saw Stonehenge, and that was old to the Romans. Just like the pyramids, it was old to the Romans. So it's just incredible to me how long human history is really, and just how varied it is. Like, learning history can show you the future in a lot of ways because I mean I say it jokingly sometimes that the future is the past, but it's kind of true. I mean, the Romans, there's a lot of wisdom in the saying, there is nothing new under the sun. Because pretty much everything that has happened in history, ha- I don't like the phrase history repeats itself. It doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Oh, good night, dude. Have a good night. Feel free to subscribe, and if you want to listen to my series, you can find them on SoundCloud and YouTube. You have a great night. It was awesome talking to you, and really cool talking to somebody who is from a non-English speaking country. So, good night. Okay, so I'm in a bit of a pickle with this Burgundy War. I thought they'd be a bit easier to deal with, but it'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Okay. All right, we're gonna have to deal with these guys up at Calais. We might actually be able to snipe a few provinces from Burgundy while we're at it. Where's he going? That was a really cool conversation. So I love that this podcast has given me the opportunity to connect with so many different people. Some of my biggest non-American countries for listenership are Indonesia and Japan, and that just it blows my mind that there are that many people who want to listen to one weird American fellow ramble about history in countries so far flung from my own. I often get cynical about the modern era, but the internet is one of the cooler things about it. The fact that I can literally have a conversation with someone in Turkey, of all places, while playing a video game and broadcasting said video game to a bunch of strangers on the internet. That's genuinely incredible. So, back to French history for the time being, though. So, the Burgundian inheritance is probably not going to happen. We've only got 14 years to make it trigger. So, it means we're going to have to take over Burgundy the hard way. And by that I mean killing an awful lot of people, which is how a lot of history shook out. Alright. Also, forgive me, the whiskey is starting to catch up to me. I am 3 drinks deep at this point, and I am having a really good time. Yeah, we'll enforce the serfdom. And this is some strong stuff I'm drinking, so I am feeling pretty good. I hope you are too. No better way to spend a Sunday night. Just relaxing with whiskey and history. What do I do here? I'll take that prestige. That always helps. And I don't really care about Castile. They don't like me at all, so doesn't really. I'm not gonna get them to like me, so I'll just take that free prestige. I'll let my guys handle the rest of Burgundy. Okay. Should not be. Who else am I at war with? Alright, just got Burgundy. Really. And I do have their capital, so let me see if I can piece them out for something here. Maybe I can take over. Alright, that'll get me a. So I'll piece them out for cash this time. I'll take a boatload of cash, some war reparations, and trade power, and annex Brittany. There we go. Alright, that will get me a small coalition of Burgundy, Provence, and England, but I'm not particularly worried about that. I won't be going to war with anyone anytime soon, so let's focus on integrating our remaining two vassals. Gonna improve relations with you and you, and I'm gonna royal marry one of you soon. So let's move you to Paris and my other army to Bordeaux and settle in to integrate our new Breton territories. Take that autonomy change. Do I have another mission that I can complete? And I am serious about doing a series on Islamic history. I would love to do it. I think it would benefit a lot of people, particularly in the Western world, to have at least a sense of Islamic history. It's a very interesting history, period, but it's one that isn't all that well understood by a lot of people in Western Europe and America. It's an entirely different civilizational core that has often been in touch with our own, but one that I think Westerners need to understand to make sense of the modern world as it is. Um, and it's having that sense of connection or knowledge of the past is one of the greatest benefits of studying history. And yeah, it is somewhat difficult to find jobs in history, but I will never say you shouldn't study it because it can enrich your life beyond anything you thought possible, knowing where you came from. Because if again, I say it in the podcast all the time, if you know where you came from, you can see where you're going, at least to a degree. In the future is nothing that we haven't experienced in the past. And by understanding the past, we can get as close to predicting the future as anyone really can get. And I mean, I have actually had a plan for a long time to do a series about how people look at history. So I ask you that does it really matter if some historical events happened? If those events, whether exaggerated or not, inspired people to greater actions further on? So, the Battle of Thermopylae, right? The Greeks against the Persians, everyone knows this one. It's the subject of the movie 300. It was a complete fabrication, the movie 300. There were 1,400 Greeks in that pass. Spartans were the extreme minority. But the story became incredibly powerful. The story became more important than the history itself. And it inspired people to fight, it inspired people to make a stand. So, what matters more? The actual event or the legend that inspired people? I would argue they're of equal importance. You need to know, obviously, that the Battle of Thermopylae, as it's understood today, is a complete and utter fabrication. But it's also important to know that that fabrication meant the world to so many people, and it inspired them to do great things. It's sort of like there's a whole mythology built up around figures like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. I mean, George Washington, the father of his country. I mean, he was just a regular guy, all things considered. But there's this mythology about him that makes him more than he was. It makes him. I mean, there were Native American tribes who thought George Washington was some kind of demigod because at several battles he had. In one battle, he had two horses shot out from under him, and he had 6 bullets go through his coat without a single one actually hitting his body. That is the stuff of legends. And what is a legend but history turned into a story? Because all legends contain at their core a grain of truth. It's what inspires the legend. And I realize this might be a bit of drunken rambling, but I know I'm making a good point here. That what is legend and what is history can sometimes be difficult to suss out. But sometimes what is legend is history to a lot of people. And those people are operating on the idea that those legends are history. That is their story that they're telling themselves. It's their story of any nation's history is its story, the story it tells itself of why it's good and why it's here and why it is. And that is something that I think we've lost a lot of connection to, which is bad. But if you know your history, you understand the world a lot better. Is I guess the root of what I'm getting at here. If you learn history, you will learn to a degree what you're doing here. Why you are important. Why you are, no matter who you are, no matter where you are the result of centuries, millennia even, of people all doing their own human thing. And they're a direct line to you. And so don't ever think you don't matter. Because you are the end result of hundreds of years of people living and dying and fighting for what they believed in to make a world for you. So if if you believe in any kind of an afterlife and you think your ancestors are watching you right now, think of how proud they are that their genetic lineage is able to flick a goddamn switch and light up a room. Has literally just a box overflowing with food in their kitchen. That is a luxury they could not have even dreamed of in their day. And here you are, you've made it because of generations upon generations of sacrifice, of people sacrificing to make a better world for their children. And we get here. And you understand the weight of all of that if you study history. You understand how much people have struggled throughout history to get what we have now. And that's why it fascinates me. History is a story of all of us. Everybody has a connection to it, whether they're aware of it or not. Everything you see in the world today is the result of something that happened yesterday. And I often say that history isn't a line, history is a web. You can't pick up one strand of it without picking up 7 or 8 others at the same time. Everything is connected in history. You can't. I don't like it when people try to draw hard lines, right? Because it's difficult to, and it's almost impossible to. I mean, I use this example in a conversation with a good friend of mine on his podcast, where does World War One begin? Does it begin with Archduke Franz Ferdinand being assassinated on the streets of Sarajevo, or does it begin with Bismarck's chain of alliances in Europe, or does it begin with the unification of Germany in the first place? You can't really draw a hard line on it because every single one of those events contributed to it. And if you touch one, you pick up dozens of others at the same time. That's why you need to study all of history as much as you can. And I know it's hard, but I mean, history is not easy. People think People look down on liberal arts as arts degrees, but history is not easy, and it's not easy, but the rewards are great. So I thoroughly encourage you to go out there, go to your local bookstore, your local library, find the first book on history that looks interesting, and pick it up and start reading. I guarantee you'll find something to like. And I also guarantee you your life will be a lot richer for having read it. Because you will you will assign a lot more weight to your being here. You understand the unlikelihood of you existing. Because here's the thing, there was at one point in human history, if you go back far enough, where there were fewer than 1,000 of us on the planet. That we exist as all at all as a species is fucking incredible. Hold on, let me integrate my vassal and then I'll continue rambling about why we're all important. But think about it. You are the result of successive generations of men and women who survived long enough and cared enough to reproduce and to make more of themselves. And I mean, I think I owe it to them to. I owe it to those poor Quebecois farmers, to those German mercenaries, to those Irish immigrants huddling on the fucking boat over here to continue their story, to continue all of the stories, because we all have a story. Every single one of us, and it's a human story, but we each have our own chapters in it in history. And if you study those chapters in history, you get a much greater understanding and a much greater perspective than you ever could imagine. So don't let anyone discount history. History is important. Welcome to my TED Talk. So yeah, I can give those too. Don't even need to use any pretentious buzzwords. And yes, I realize it was only half coherent, but that's what you get after 3, 4 maker's marks. This is probably my last one for the night, though. I'm only streaming for another 30 more minutes, so. Hold on, drop the cap. There we go. Alright, so, back to French history. We are centralizing the kingdom, integrating these vassals, and then we gotta deal with Burgundy and the Papal State. It'll be a pain in the ass, but we can do it. Also, before we get administrative cadre, I'm switching to autocracy. That was one thing that very much was happening during this era, is early urbanization, is people moving out of the countryside and into cities. And it was one of the most marked departures from the past. And it's really the beginnings of where we are today, where the vast majority of people live in cities. I'll lower Texas. But it starts in this period. This is the period where urbanization really starts to kick off. It's where a lot of modern agricultural methods get discovered that allow us to sustain these massive fucking cities that we have today, right? A city the size of New York would have been unthinkable to people in this era. But thanks to the agricultural methods developed by people in the early modern period, cities like New York are not only possible, they're relatively common, and they get much bigger than that. I mean, if you study history, you know why a city like New York is so fucking incredible. I will focus on inflation there. Because throughout most of history, that is something that is beyond even the wildest imagination of your ancestors. Rome was considered a positively massive city in its day at 1 million people. New York is over 10 times that. The Romans wouldn't have even been able to comprehend a city like that, but because of the sacrifices of successive generations of your ancestors, my ancestors, everybody's ancestors, that's possible. Your ancestors made sacrifices so you wouldn't have to. And you get that perspective if you study history. I guess I'm right back on this soapbox, but study history. You'll enrich your own life beyond your wildest dreams. Hi there, welcome to the stream. We are doing a France playthrough, and I am several whiskeys deep, so I'm in full-blown history rambling mode. But I hope you enjoy the gameplay and the history. Feel free to subscribe if you want more of it, and you can catch my latest podcast episodes if you scroll up through the chat. I have them posted. We should be set to start colonizing soon, once I've integrated the last of my vassals. But yeah, once France is centralized, things get a lot easier. And a lot easier to look at because border gore is disgusting, but that's the name of the game in Paradox games. Um, but so as I was saying, that's the thing that blows my mind about history is you enrich your life by learning it. I would say more so than pretty much any other liberal art. It is something that everybody should study. It is something that everybody should be at least relatively well versed in, because if you know your past, you know how you're connected to everything around you. If you know how you got to where you are today, you know everything that led up to your existence, and it lends so much significance to you standing there. I am playing with a lot of mods on. The visual mod is called Europa Reborn. Makes the map nice and pretty. I'm also playing with the Grand Exhibition, which gives much better event pictures, and I'm playing with the All Roads Lead to Rome mod, which gives you the ability to build road networks, which they don't lend much to each province, but I like the role playing with it because this is the era of political centralization of these great kingdoms and nations, and it was during this period that they would have started building their own road networks internally. Medieval roads tended to emerge out of convenience largely, but during this period they were intentionally built to tie together the emerging kingdoms of the period. So I just like it for role playing as a historian. What do we produce in Saint-Ouen? Wheat, so I will take the manpower there. I can publish a mod list if you like. Mostly they're just flavor and visual mods. I don't play with much that really changes the gameplay all that much. Probably the most significant one is it makes it so colonization is more historical. Because one of the things that annoys me about this game is the fact that the fact that Spain never colonizes Mexico and the like, and this mod fixes that and makes countries colonize historically, and it makes it a lot easier for historical colonizers to get going. So the New World actually makes sense. I gotcha. No, this is a difficult game to get into. It is a hell of a lot of fun once you get into it, but yeah, it is a pain in the ass to get into. Granted, that's pretty much all Paradox games. There are a lot of great tutorials for this one on YouTube, and pretty much all of them are applicable all the way through the current patch. But it It looks a lot more intimidating than it is, I will tell you, because I mean, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I was able to figure it out. So you'll get the hang of it. Um, Granted, I've been playing for like 1,400 hours, and I'm still learning new things about this game. But it is a hell of a lot of fun if you know history, because you know what was going on in this period and why it was as interesting as it is. Because this period is really the birth of the modern world, right? I mean, it's the end of medieval. It's the end of the medieval world and the birth of. It's the earliest days of everything we know today. It all starts here in the 15th and 16th centuries. Everything that led to World War II starts here. Everything that led to the modern world. Oh, I gotcha. I gotcha. Anything in particular having difficulty with? I might be able to show you a few tricks. Right. I am probably going to need to fabricate on Provence. Oh, really? That's the Papal State. But whatever. We'll go to war with the Pope. It'll be fine. Um, One of the things I would very much recommend is I gotcha. So that could be due to your alliance chain. If your alliances are too strong, most other countries won't call your bluff. So like say you're playing as Spain, like Castile, and you've allied France and Austria, nobody's going to go messing with you because they'll have to fight three global powers at once. So that could be very much due to how you set up your alliances. Um, I would honestly say that England is very good for learning the game. So is Spain. They are very good for learning all the mechanics, and Russia actually too. Muscovy is very good for learning on. Um, England and Castile are good for learning how colonization works, how the economy works, and how the trade system works. And Muscovy is very good for learning how conquest works. Just very different playstyles between them. England is also particularly good if you want to learn how to play tall through development and the like. That is an interesting thing. So if the colonies go to war with each other, they won't call you in. But if so, like say you're playing as England and you have the 13 colonies set up, if for whatever reason they were to declare war on Spain, they would probably bring you in. The issue is that most of what they're fighting overseas is wars with other colonial nations or native nations, and for whatever reason they don't drag you in on that. I can't speak to why. Historically, they would have, but for some reason they choose not to. Um, that is known only to Paradox. Um, but if you want to learn a lot of the, I gotcha. That is very weird. So what I usually will do to get around that is I you just got to be very aggressive with conquest of powerful natives like that. So if you're playing as Spain, your best bet is to just aggressively gobble up Aztec territory. Every opportunity you get, every time the truce times out, go conquer more of it. Yeah, no. Sometimes the AI in Paradox games is not great, and sometimes the AI just does things that are mind-bogglingly stupid. Um, but no, my recommendation would be to just be extremely aggressive in your conquest of the New World. Um, you have a tech advantage. You really don't have to worry about coalitions because your armies will just nuke everything they encounter. So yeah, that my recommendation would be just be very aggressive with the Aztecs and other native nations. And really, the Aztecs are the only ones you're going to have to worry about. None of the other native nations are that strong. Maybe the Inca, if one of those countries can really get going. But I've only ever seen players be able to manage that. The AI is usually too stupid to really capitalize on what they can do. That is, I have actually never seen that. Um, that is strange. Usually they won't guarantee anything in the New World. I will tell you, as Spain, you should be able to fight England. You have a morale boost on them, and you should be able to fight them in terms of navy. You should be able to build up a navy that can rival them. That is a problem, though. What you could try doing is attacking the allies of the nations you want to attack. That is one way that it is. It's good. It's a good way to grow if the countries you want to conquer have allied a lot of big mean friends. Is try to go after them using their allies. When I play England, that's usually what I'll do with Scotland. I will use them. I will use their Irish allies to get at them because usually the Scots ally the French, and if you're early game England, you are not fighting the French successfully. So your best bet for conquering Scotland is just to use the fact that they usually will ally with one of the Irish miners, attack them, and then take a couple provinces off of England or off of Scotland, and force them to break their alliance with France. So give that a go. Try attacking the Aztecs' native allies. The difficulty there is they usually vassalize a lot of things in that region, so you might have some difficulty. But that is what I usually will do in that situation. That is interesting though. I have never seen the English guarantee the Aztec. That must just be a case of them being rivaled to you and not having much else to do. Also, I am playing with a mod that extends my missions, gives me a lot more to work with. Um, I find a lot of the missions expanded missions are a hell of a lot more fun. Oh yeah, no, the Ottomans are arguably the best beginner nation. You won't learn much about colonization or how the New World works, but the Ottomans are OP by design. The only thing you got to watch out for with them is when you get to roughly the 18th century, you will have to start dealing with a lot of crises and your military getting weaker. But by that point, you should be so massive, you don't have to worry about it. Um, the Ottomans are absurdly powerful, which is weird because the Ottoman AI has been nerfed completely. It is way less aggressive than it used to be, which is a bummer because they used to be the final boss of the game for a lot of other countries, like especially Russia, arguably France. The Ottomans were like your final boss, but they aren't that anymore. They're kind of a joke compared to what they used to be AI wise. They still get all the buffs, but they don't conquer Egypt, and they usually stay pretty small these days. I will say though, the memes in this game are fucking golden. All of them. I did my first Prussia playthrough years ago because of the memes. Venice is actually also a really fun country for new players if you want to learn how the trade system works. you can have a hell of a lot of fun with them. Because they're sitting right on one of the most valuable end nodes in the game. They're kind of like the England of the Mediterranean. They are very difficult to attack, and you are going to be making boatloads of money, and you'll have to learn how things like trade flow works. Which honestly, trade is probably the most complicated system in this game to learn. Everything else you can kind of figure out fairly quickly, but the trade is a real bitch to learn how to work. But once you figure out how it works, you are making shitloads of money. Okay, the papacy has discovered my spy, so I'll just fabricate my claim and get the hell out. Alright. And actually, as of the most recent patch, France is good for learning how vassal management works. So is Russia, but France is also good. France is also a very good beginner nation because you can do a lot with it. You can conquest a little bit. You can vassal manage. All right. So the way trade works, there are only three end nodes in the game, and end nodes are where all global trade ends up. So you have the English Channel, you have Venice and Genoa. That is where all trade ends, right? So every single other trade node eventually feeds into those three. So Ivory Coast, Safi, Tunis, Valencia, Seville all end up in Genoa, whereas Bordeaux, Champagne, the Rhineland, Saxony, Lubeck, the North Sea all end up in the English Channel. What you want to do is arrange your merchants so you have as many nodes connected as possible. So say you're playing as Spain. You're going to want, or actually Portugal is a better example for this. Say you're playing as Portugal. You're going to want merchants in Safi, in the Ivory Coast, in the Cape, in the Indian Ocean, all funneling trade into your node. What that will do is it'll give you power in all of those nodes, and it'll send the money right to you. Now there are other intricacies to it, like the trade centers, which are a relatively new thing, and trade power. So let's look at the English Channel. I have 24% trade power in the node, which means I have control of roughly a quarter of that trade. So roughly a quarter of that money is coming to me. And you can check on this by clicking on the node. But what you want to do is funnel as much trade as possible using your merchants into your home node, which for me right now is Champagne because my capital is Paris. That is my main trade city. But once I build up these trade centers in the English Channel, I will probably move my trade city to Calais or Caux because those are far more valuable trade-wise. Because it's an end node. Because all trade running through a lot of the New Worlds and in Europe is funneled to the English Channel. Um, and really, trade takes a long time to get going, but once you get it going, it is your biggest moneymaker. So with merchants, what you're not going to want them to collect from trade. Collecting from trade with the Ottomans and a God Venice, I'm getting money. So that will depend on where your home node is. So if you're playing as the Ottomans, I'd wager your home node is Constantinople. What you're going to want to do is you might want to station a merchant to collect in Venice because that is a valuable node, but it's not your home node. So what you're going to want to do is funnel as much trade as possible to Constantinople. So you would want to set up merchants in Aleppo, Alexandria, Crimea, and further east into Persia and Bosphora. You're going to want them all funneling trade into Constantinople, where your main trade city is. Now, if you control an end node, but if it's not your main trade center, you can have one of your merchants collect there and earn you some extra money. But most of your trade income is going to come from directing trade from other nodes into your home node. Like I said, so if you're the Ottomans, you'll want to set up somebody in Alexandria, somebody in Aleppo, somebody in Crimea. Those are the three big ones. And then every trade node that's connected to them. So, like, if you get big enough as the Ottomans, you'll want somebody in Astrakhan, somebody in Kiev, somebody in the Gulf of Aden, and somebody even further east. Uh, Control trade and redirection. Control trade is what I'm referring to. So you'll want to send your merchant to control. So yeah, you'll want to send your merchant to transfer trade power is the technical name. And what that will do is it will send your merchant to the trade node and they will transfer power from that node to the next one and that node to the next one and eventually back to your home node. Um, I would say play around with it as the Ottomans. Try to set up your trade. Um, like start by setting up somebody in Alexandria and Aleppo because I know you start with two merchants. But if you're somebody like the Ottomans, I would highly recommend taking trade ideas, and then you'll want to set up a merchant in Crimea, in Persia, Basra, and the Gulf of Aden, and you will see your money grow exponentially. So you'll want to send them to those nodes and tell them to transfer trade power. You only want to collect in nodes that are valuable but aren't your main nodes. So you might want to send an extra merchant if you have one to collect from Venice because that is a very valuable trade node, but it's not going to be your main one as the Ottomans. Usually you want your main one to be in your home region so it's easier to protect. So with if I pick one of the trade nodes in the English Channel, that'll be perfectly reasonable for me to protect as France, even though my capital is in Paris and my main trade city right now. But English Channel is way more valuable. So yes, so if you're directing trade power to your home node, and you'll have to click on the city. So if you're the Ottomans, you're going to want to set your main trade city by click this and set your main trade city to Constantinople. You don't want to collect in your home node. You collect from that automatically. So what you'll want to do is once you've set up Constantinople as your main trade city, set up merchants to transfer trade power in Alexandria and Aleppo. They will start funneling that money through the Eastern Mediterranean into Constantinople, and that will make you really rich. Um, I don't think you need the DLCs to just make your merchants transfer trade power. I'm pretty sure that's in the base game. Um, you don't need all the DLCs to enjoy it though. Um, there are only a handful. I would recommend if you like take to the game and you really like it, I would recommend Rights of Man, Emperor, and Dharma. Those are all pretty good. Um, but yeah, you should be able to transfer trade if you don't have the DLCs. I'm pretty sure that's base game function. The only thing trade wise that the other DLCs add is new trade nodes. But Alexandria and Aleppo are two of the ones that have been there since the beginning. So you should be okay. And let me know how that Ottoman game turns out. But once you get trade going with somebody like the Ottomans, you are making shitloads of money. Constantinople is not the English Channel, but it is pretty darn good. Actually, another example. Oh, I know. And one of my biggest gripes about Paradox is if you haven't been in these games for a long time, it is a real pain in the ass to really catch up with all the DLC. And I think it keeps a lot of people away from the games. Um, but you get a lot of basic functions with the regular updates. So if you have the opportunity, get DLC, but you definitely don't need them to enjoy the game. Um, and I would also look around at mods because sometimes some of the mods will be able to replicate the DLC features without needing the DLC. That would be my other recommendation. And if you get the mods from Steam, they're probably going to be okay. I do know that some people have difficulty getting from Steam in different countries. I realize that America's one of the easier countries to get these games in. So I really can't speak to other countries. I haven't played this in other ones. Um, but I can say that the trade power is that's a base game function. You should be able to do that right off the bat. But my other example for trade power is if you play as Muscovy, and you form Russia, all you're going to do is set up your trade to funnel. Like you'll set up somebody in Kazan, in Astrakhan, in Kiev, in Crimea, and they'll funnel everything towards the Novgorod node, which is going to be your main trade node as Muscovy. And that will make you shitloads of money, even though the trade continues to leave out the Baltic Sea. Whatever you set your so like if you set your main if I set my main trade city to Ko, which costs you some Diplo points, then that is where you automatically collect trades. So you don't need to send a merchant automatically to do it where you automatically will collect it from. Out of curiosity, where are you from? I've heard of a lot of problems with Australia and Steam, but I'll admit I don't know that much about difficulties in other countries. I gotcha. I cannot speak to how Argentina Steam works, but I will say some of the DLCs are worth it, but you definitely don't need all of them. Um, you only it's only worth getting all of them if you get very into the game and you've sunk over 1,000 hours into it. But you definitely don't need all of them to have a good time. There are a lot of EU4 YouTubers that will have like good recommendations for these. Um, I gotcha. No, I have heard about that. I actually my day job I work with the stock market, so I have heard of things in Argentina, and I hope you guys are doing okay down there. Um, Argentina is pretty high on my list of countries I would like to visit, so I hope things are going okay down there. Um, but I would recommend a couple of them. Like Empire, like the most recent one is pretty good. Empire, Dharma, Rights of Man is probably the most important one, especially if you want to play in the HRE. And then there's a Russia DLC that's pretty darn good if you like playing in Eastern Europe. I gotcha. Really, I hope you guys turn out okay because I like Argentina quite a lot. I have a certain amount of fondness for the country. Um, I Buenos Aires looks beautiful, and I very much enjoy traveling. I would love to see the country. So I hope you guys do okay out there. But I did hear about the Argentine inflation issue. So gotta hope you guys can get that sorted out because oh, it's an easy time to get a little to lose a lot of faith in the world. But uh, if my study of history has shown anything at all, it's that things usually work out in the end. It'll be ugly for a while, but they usually work out in the end. Usually for the best. Yeah, it seems that's the one lesson that nobody ever learns is that you can't print your way out of economic problems. If I remember right, in Germany, like people were, and mind you, I am four Maker's Marks deep, so I'm a little drunk right now. But people were like papering their walls with Deutschmarks because they were so worthless. Um, I mean, I'd wager we might have a similar problem here in America soon enough if they keep printing money like they have been. The dollar's going to lose its value. Um, yeah, no, that's every high schooler learns that you can't print your way out of economic crisis and that you shouldn't invade Russia in winter, but they only ever remember the Russia in winter part. And they think they can print their way out of these problems, but they can't because the money has nothing behind it. I've I have heard horror stories from other countries. Like, I mean, America, it's been pretty shitty, but we've still been relatively stable during COVID. But I've seen footage out of Australia of people being like stuck in their buildings by the police, and it's just ridiculous. So I I hope you're doing okay down there. I hope your family's doing okay, and I hope Argentina comes out of this okay. It is a weird time to be alive. That's for damn sure. I got we actually had a similar problem here. Something like 1/3 or so of American small businesses have closed down because they just can't keep open during COVID, and the large corporations like Walmart and Amazon have just been happy to gobble up their business. But in my neck of the woods, right around in the East Coast, this Mid-Atlantic region, a lot of businesses have gone under. Like a lot of my local restaurants are under, a lot of my local small shops are under. Walmart's doing fine though. Amazon's doing fine. And it sucks because a lot of people I know have had a lot of economic difficulties, but I know it's rough all around. This thing cannot be over soon enough. I mean, even my company had a rough time of it early on. I mean, it deals with the stock market, so a lot of people uh, kind of got out of that right when the COVID crash hit. So it is a weird time to be alive, no matter where you are. We'll say that. Stock market research mostly. Um, I write like research reports on companies and the like. Uh, so I keep an eye on the market most days, and I keep a pretty good I have a pretty good idea of where things are. Like I usually will have Yahoo Finance or something like that up while I'm working just to keep tabs on things. Um, it is a very fun job, I will say, because I get to learn something every day I go to work. Um, Usually, when I write a report, I have to learn how a new industry works. So it is a lot of fun to work in. So I don't think I'm quitting the day job anytime soon. I will say that. Um, but I do know. I have a buddy who works for meteorology, like one of the U.S. government meteorological groups, and we have two of the worst jobs to be optimistic about the future with, because I can see that there are a lot of underlying problems with the global economy that go even deeper than a lot of people think they do. And he can see that the planet is melting down at an alarming pace. So neither of us is particularly optimistic, but I think things will be fine. Things are usually fine. Things will get better. It's going to be difficult for a while, but things will get better. That's one thing that you do learn if you study history is things always get better in the long term. It sucks now, but it will get better eventually. Oh, right. So what that happened, that was what's called a short squeeze. So when a investment firm shorts a stock, they are they are betting that that stock will go under, basically. So what a bunch of hedge funds were doing was they were borrowing shares of GameStop and selling them at market price with the intention of buying them back later. It's really squirrely bullshit, and I don't like it. But the idea was if GameStop went under, then they wouldn't have to pay back those shares, so they could just pocket the gain from borrowing and selling the shares. But when that kind of a short is happening, if enough people buy in, then the hedge funds can't buy back those shares at the lower price, and that drives the price through the roof. So, what a bunch of Redditors figured out is if they all bought these shares of GameStop, then the hedge funds would basically be at their mercy, and they would have to buy at whatever price Reddit decided. So, got higher and higher and higher, and they weren't selling. So the hedge funds had to buy at whatever price they collectively decided was good. And I believe it peaked at around 430, $440. It was ridiculous. Um, but because they couldn't cover those shorts, a lot of those hedge funds got in a lot of trouble. So like Melvin Capital had to liquidate their entire position in Alibaba just to cover their losses from the GameStop short, because when that short squeeze happened, their losses became theoretically infinite. A similar thing actually happened with Volkswagen back in 2010, 2011, thereabouts, where, again, they were shorting Volkswagen, expecting it to go under, and it didn't because enough people bought in that most. Here's how ridiculous it was, and this will be my closing statement because it's getting pretty late. So here's how ridiculous it was. They shorted more shares of GameStop than physically exist. They shorted by something like 150%. So like half again as many shares as there were borrowed and sold. It was ridiculous. It shouldn't be allowed, but they were planning on making a boatload of money from forcing GameStop to go under. And people caught wind of this and managed to reverse it by buying into the stock collectively. So short selling is some squirrely bullshit that I don't like. Um, and I'm still rooting for game. I wish I had bought in. I really did. I missed that one completely. I had a friend recommend it to me. I didn't buy in, but God, I wish I was a part of that. I actually have an episode on it. Let me actually post that. I have an episode covering this if you're curious. Here we go. So I do a rundown about it here if you're curious. Um, that's my history podcast if you're interested. So if you watch that, I do a rundown of exactly what happened and how it all worked. Um, but that is probably about it for me because I do have work tomorrow. So thank you everybody for watching this stream, and we will pick up with this French game next Sunday. Um, this France game next Sunday. I will maybe be doing a multiplayer stream on Tuesday. I will keep you all posted. Have a great night. Renegade Historian signing off, everybody.